Now, Russia has warned against supplying anti-aircraft missiles to terrorist groups in Syria.
We have noticed some Syrian opposition members demanded from their regional sponsors to deliver anti-aircraft missile launchers. We hope that our regional and other partners have enough common sense not to react to such demands. Russia will not allow anyone to threaten life of its citizens, including servicemen. Any unfriendly actions towards Russia will not be left without consequences.
A Foreign Ministry spokeswoman said that any anti-Russia stance will elicit an appropriate response from Moscow. Warning comes amid reports that some regional countries may arm terrorists with ground-to-surface missiles. Takfiri militants in Syria have recently acknowledged that they received Grad missiles from their foreign backers. A rise in foreign support for terror groups comes as a Syrian army is advancing against them on several fronts. Meanwhile, Russia says that it's prepared to secure safe passage for militants to quit the city of Aleppo. A top Russian general said the move is aimed at freeing civilians and helping the delivery of humanitarian aid to the flashpoint city. Now we're joined out of Bristol by Mr. Tony Gosling, investigative journalist. Hello, Mr. Gosling. Ironically enough, it was just a few months ago where the Saudi foreign minister Adel Al-Jubeir made this exact remark that if their side seems to be losing in this campaign that they have going on in Syria, that they're willing to give these foreign-backed terrorists more sophisticated weaponry. Hence, he specifically said, surface-to-air missiles. Your thoughts on this?
Well, the air war in Syria now is what everybody's eyes around the world are focused on, because this is where the battle for the country will be lost or won. Also, the cat is out of the bag, isn't it, really? When you start to hear that surface-to-air missiles are being supplied to the terrorists, it's pretty obvious that the Saudis and the West are actually supporting these terrorists. If they're giving them the very best in up-to-date weaponry to shoot down the Russian jets, there's no messing around anymore with saying that they're trying to get rid of Islamists in Syria. Also, it may be that the Russians have helped the return of international law to the country, because we often seem to forget that the legitimate ruler who has won a democratic election is President Assad, and yet the West seems to be happy to have reports from the terrorist parts of Aleppo night after night on the news over here, as if these guys are the people who should be running the country. Clearly they're not.
And it's funny that the West hasn't really got the message, because they did the same thing in Afghanistan with the Taliban to bring down Russian jets and helicopters, and then they turned these weapons on the American forces themselves. But yet you don't see them learning a lesson from that experience here.
Well, it's good that you bring up that, because actually for a lot of people here in the West, they have no idea how far this goes back. The West supporting Islamists right the way back to the 1980s and to Operation Cyclone in Afghanistan. That was where really the beginnings of what you might call a kind of parasitic heresy of Islam was fostered by the West, mostly by the CIA, Central Intelligence Agency, and it's talked about quite well in a film called Charlie Wilson's War, a feature film which was made at the time. This was a kind of beginning, and at the same time in the 1980s, over in Israel, they were preparing something called the Yinon Plan, which was published for the first time in 1982. The idea of this was to balkanize the Middle East, countries like Iraq and Syria and Jordan even, etc., in order to disrupt Arab government in the region, to allow the Israelis to then expand. But what we've got in a way is really a corruption of the monotheistic faiths across the Middle East. That's what the CIA has been working on. You've got the Judaism as being corrupted by the Zionist organizations, by the Zionist lobby. You've got Christians being corrupted by Christian Zionists, because most Zionists are actually Christians who've been duped, mostly in the United States, into going along with the state of Israel being some kind of, shall we say, the messengers of God, that kind of thing. The state of Israel, that's what they believe, many Christian Zionists. And then with the Islamic faith, the Islamists that have grown up since Afghanistan, since the Operation Cyclone, And now it's becoming pretty clear what with the potential supplying anyway of surface-to-air missiles to the terrorists in Syria, that this was the plan all along. It's just been a subterfuge, and they've been using the Western media to pull the wool over people's eyes.
Thank you so much for your input, Mr. Gosling. Once again, Tony Gosling giving us his valuable input, investigative journalist out of Bristol.